Hi class, my name is Kayla Dickerson and today I'll be doing a presentation on the Ford and Firestone tires scandal. So to start, we're going to start with our overview and then go into issues, individuals involved, media exposure, the legal and industrial impact that the case had, the resolution, some recommendations that I have personally, and then a conclusion to wrap it up. So to start, the Ford and Firestone agreement started in the late 1980s. They started because Ford felt like their tires were inferior to Firestone's tires and wanted to put the best tires possible on their Ford vehicles. So in the late 1990s, there were some problems with some of the Ford Explorers overseas. They had companies in Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Southeast Asia, just to name a few, and they started getting a lot of complaints about the tire shredding and the tread separation on the Ford Explorer. So in the beginning, they decided to just replace all the tires that were being complained overseas, kind of a voluntary exchange. They didn't really tell anybody. It wasn't really an official recall. They just decided to voluntarily do it just to avoid any unnecessary problems. However, they also decided not to inform the U.S. and the National Highway Transportation and Safety Association of these issues, assuming that it wouldn't happen here in the U.S. They just kind of knocked it off to being that the driving conditions and the people in overseas were driving differently and their conditions were a little bit different, reason why the tires were acting up. So some of the issues obviously are the tire defects. So the tread, they would separate at high speed. So if you're on the highway in a Ford Explorer, for example, their main problem car, the tires would start to separate from the rim and it would cause tire blowouts and car flips and things like that. And it caused a lot of accidents. A lot of people passed away and got really injured from it. So in the end, they decided to do a recall and the NHTSA opened an investigation. At first they didn't, which goes into hiding the defects because they didn't report the problem right away, and thus that caused a lot of these injuries and accidents to happen. So a lot of people saw this as they weren't worried about customer safety, which should be an automotive company's number one issue and number one priority. This also leads into lack of aggression. So it's felt that it wasn't their necessity to report it right away. Firestone, they had previously dealt with tire issues in the past, and a lot of people felt like it should have been their number one priority to make sure that all of their tires were equipped and safe after their first problem, yet this didn't happen and they kind of just negated it and continued to not worry about it and pushed it off to the side. The NHTSA got a lot of complaints, but they ignored them at first, saying, these people, they're just not getting good tire maintenance, they're not keeping up with it, and they ignored it until a lot of complaints came in and they finally decided to do something. So individuals involved, there were over 3,500 complaints, over 100 deaths, and over 500 injuries that led to these blowouts and the tread separation. The plant that produced these faulty tires did have to shut down. Firestone did have to close down their entire plant, having to lay off over 450 people, unfortunately. And both companies failed to have a crisis management team, meaning that they didn't really have anything going on once all these complaints and all these injuries happened. They just kind of paid everything by ear. They didn't have a crisis management team there to really get the ball rolling, kind of put a stop to it before it happened, and to really catch up to the problem before it got too late. They ended up spending large amounts of money, and all this could have been avoided if they had actually had something in place. Media exposure. So the NHTSA, Congress blasted them for not listening to the complaints a lot sooner, saying that the companies cared more about the money than the concerns. Like I said before, State Farm insurance agency, they had a lot of complaints and went to the NHTSA with them, and they just kind of pushed it off to the side, said, you know what, this isn't a really big issue. A lot of people, we do have a lot of complaints, but it's not really that big of a deal. No one's died yet, I guess, reason why they hadn't really done anything. And then once a bunch started coming out, the overseas ones as well as ones from the US, they realized they had to do something, and it was a little bit too late. These lawsuits led to the Center for Auto Safety filing lawsuit for 3 of Firestone's tires. There were models that were on the Ford Explorer and then other model cars as well, that they felt that needed to be recalled. Both companies, Ford and Firestone, did argue that it was only the 15-inch tires that were on the Ford Explorer that were causing the blowouts. However, the Center for Auto Safety felt like it was best to just recall all 3 types of tires, no matter the size or what vehicle they were on, just to be on the safe side, since so much had already happened, just to avoid any more crisis. So the legal and industrial impact, both companies' reputation did take a big hit. Firestone, they received a lot of backlash for not reporting it sooner, and they didn't give any reassurance to consumers that any action was being taken, whereas Ford did. Once everything did come out and everything did come to light, Ford's VP did make sure that he got on the press and told everybody what was going on. It took longer for action to be taken as well because Firestone's executive team is actually based out of Japan. They are Bridgestone, Firestone as one company, and their executive branch is in Japan. So once everything happened, their policy and strategy team didn't get the information right away, so no action was taken right away. Ethics, neither company practiced ethics when they withheld the information about the tires, including a multitude of ethical concerns that they just completely disowned, didn't pay attention to. A lot of people think for the dollar, in fact. So the resolution, Ford's net income for their third quarter did drop drastically, 7.4% decrease from a year ago. After the Ford recall, the CEO, like I said, did go to the media and did try to make a turnaround, even though it was a little bit too late. Ford also opened an investigation on Firestone, and this is where their longtime partnership that was over 100 years kind of started to split. Ford felt like Firestone didn't properly test their tires, and they were very suspicious on the fact that they didn't want Ford to go to the NHTSA right away about the tread separation and the tread shedding on the highway and overseas, and they just felt very suspicious, so they opened an investigation. Firestone did try to mend their relationship, but Ford felt betrayed by them, and the long-term relationship was completely severed in 2001. My personal recommendations is that both companies should definitely have brought the situation to light a lot sooner, even though it was happening overseas and not in the US. All the same things that were used on the foreign vehicles were used on the US vehicles. And once they got one complaint, they should have really went back and kind of evaluated a little bit. I say trust your gut. I felt like Ford, they kind of trusted Firestone a little bit too much. They were like, you know what, they said not to say anything, but I feel like they knew deep down that it wasn't the right thing to do and that they should have brought it to light a lot sooner. I say always keep a crisis management team / plan on hand, just because something like this you can't really avoid. You don't know when a car is going to be defective, but once you do know, it's good to have a team there and a plan in place to really put a plan in action and get ahead of a problem before it really gets too complicated. And then it's also always better to take responsibility than play the blame game. Both companies went back and forth saying, oh, it was Firestone's tires' fault, and then Firestone was saying, oh no, Ford's Explorer, it wasn't equipped, it wasn't strong enough to really be able to steer correctly and maintain control of the car, when that's not really a fair statement for either. Both teams didn't pay attention to the defects and didn't really do anything at their maximum power to be able to avoid it. So in conclusion, everything about this scandal is very tragic. Many people lost their lives and were injured due to something happening at a much slower rate than what could have. A lot of action should have been taken a lot sooner. As a result, they both damaged their reputations in a long-time relationship. Neither company is solely to blame. However, they both should have taken the responsibility, and instead of pointing fingers, should have done all they could to avoid even more tragedy and slowing down. And that's it.